Hello everybody, it's Ryan here, and I didn't expect to be making this video so soon, especially after just releasing the first Somnia Files Explained Around initiative. I just beat the Fire Emblem DLC, the last wave came out, and I have to say, wow, I have so much to talk about, and I'm like still kind of in a state of shock. This game has just continuously surprised me. I talked about my feelings on Fire Emblem Engage as a whole in the video that's linked in the description. So watch that first if you haven't, because I'm going to be kind of calling back to my feelings on that. But in general, if you see a long video and you don't have time for that, I get it. My general consensus is Fire Emblem Engage is a special game because it is a Fire Emblem that has brought back a lot of classic Fire Emblem elements and marries them to a lot of modern Fire Emblem elements. And my favorite part of such is that it starts as a very simple story, like probably the most by-the-books default Fire Emblem story you could ever think of, and it emulates that for the first like half of the game-ish, and from that, it knows that it's a classic Fire Emblem story, and it knows that you know it's a classic Fire Emblem story, so you let your guard down, because, you know, when a game has a very simple premise with very simple characters at the start, you don't expect as much of it. And the writers know this, and they know this because as soon as you hit about chapter like 11, 12, things start changing up a little bit and get a little bit more interesting. And then by the time you get like chapter 18-ish, things start happening like crazy. And it really uses the fact that you know what's coming to really kind of make something new. And it's a really masterful effort. And I really, really enjoy being outsmarted. I got outsmarted. And it's so nice to have writers that know how good they are and know when to like hold back and to play on expectations. It feels like I'm coming into this as a player with an equal level. Now, all that aside, I felt the same thing coming into the DLC. The fourth wave came out on April 5th, which was yesterday, and I've kind of been low-lifing it. I have to set some context because Fire Emblem Three Houses got DLC as well, and it got its own DLC story expansion called the Cindered Shadows. And that story was very similar in scope, where you have a series of battles that are harder than the main game. It is separate from the main game. You play with characters that have preset classes and items and whatnot, and they usually have new battle gimmicks. And then you play a certain number of battles, usually like 5 to 6, and then you uncover the new story. With Cindered Shadows, I really liked the gameplay, like the new maps and how difficult it was, and how fairly difficult it was. Like, it was difficult, but it wasn't like asinine, it wasn't bullshit. But Cindered Shadows' story was so nothing burger. Literally, the only thing that I took from Cindered Shadows is Byleth's mother's name, which I would have to look up now because I don't immediately have it in my mind. I liked the characters they introduced, but I more so liked the Ashen Wolves in playthroughs of the main game. Like, I like them there, and they're all good characters, but I don't care for them in the DLC story because the DLC story is so nothing. Which is fine, because Three Houses has more than enough story to go around. So, like, it having a blah DLC story is, like, not the worst thing in the world. I was coming into this DLC, which doesn't have a name. It's just kind of like Wave 4. So I'm going to call it the Fell Children. And for the rest of this video, I'll call it the Fell Children, because two of the main characters that you meet are two Fell Dragon children, who are kind of similar to Alir, who are Nell and Nil, and I will get them confused as I write this because they're very similar in names. But Nell is the female who is a lance-wielding fell child, and she has a dragon stone, so she can transform into a fell dragon. So she's part Manakee, which is awesome. And Nil is an axe-wielding fell child. He's the male, and he does not have a dragon stone, and that's about it. Like gameplay-wise, he's not as good gameplay-wise. I'll get into that in a second. So like from the start, I was interested, but I was expecting nothing burger. So if it was bad, I was fine, because I expected it to be at least good gameplay-wise. And I will say, starting up the gate, the gameplay, like the difficulty of these maps is so perfectly fine-tuned. I played on normal because I'm not amazing at Fire Emblem. I'm pretty good at Fire Emblem, but I'm pretty good at Fire Emblem up to like maybe hard mode. I never do like Lunatic because I just don't have the patience for it. So I played the DLC on normal. So there are 6 chapters in the DLC, and the first 3 are relatively really easy. If you prepare and you know how to play a Fire Emblem game, and you know what you're doing, first 3 chapters not going to be a problem whatsoever. Chapters 4, 5, and the end game, oh boy, they do not fuck around. I misprepared during chapter 4 my first time around, so I had to go through. I'll go over specifically what I fucked up with when I get to that in a second. But if you are playing the DLC and you are a little disappointed on the difficulty on chapters 1, 2, and 3, keep playing. Chapter 4 will show you the door, because that chapter ramps it up. So we'll go through kind of chapter by chapter really quick. I'm not going to go in depth on the story because I'm kind of just talking. I'm not scripting this, as you may tell. The story generally is that there is a well that is insomnial that appeared in the last the wave 3 of the DLC, and from that well you can get 2 weapons. You can get a lance and you can get an axe, and I can't remember the names of them because they are French, I believe. They could be European of some sort, but these are the weapons of Nel and Nil. So you get to use them early in the main game, which is really cool. And so that was all that you could really do with the well in Wave 3 early. You could also throw some items in, and then the next chapter you could get some better items out, kind of like a normal mythological wishing well. So that was cool. It's like a little predicator. And once Wave 4 came around, you find there's kind of like a portal in the well, and Alir is summoned through the portal to this mirror world, this alternate dimension of the main world. And when I say a mirror reflection, that is quite literally it. Every character is basically flipped on their head. The divine dragon of this world, the Alir of this world, is the opposite gender of the character that you chose. I chose the female Alir of this file because my first file I chose the male. So the Alir of this mirror world is the male Alir, and noticeably they are the fully divine dragon Alir. So this is not Fell Dragon Alir, he's the full blue hair. He's fully gone through that. And the Fell children are Nel and Nil. They're kind of the only unique characters of the DLC. But everyone else is a near perfect reflection of their normal selves. And the basic plot is that this world is on the verge of war. And instead of the 12 emblem rings that are kind of keeping the world peace with the power that are being sought after, it is instead the 7 emblem bracelets, which are the characters that are brought into the DLC. So Tiki, Edelgard, and the other 2 Three Houses leaders, Chrom and Robin, Veronica, Soren, Hector, and Camilla. So they are kind of spread throughout. The Nel and Nil have Chrom and Robin's bracelet to begin with, so the basic gist of the story is traveling to the 4 countries, in a bridge version of the main story. I think it works. It is short enough that you feel like you're not spending a lot of time redoing the same thing, and it changes up just enough that you're interested in doing these things. So The first kind of chapter that you're going through, you're protecting yourself from an invasion by mysterious forces, and you kind of get the implication that Fogado, the Prince of Solm, is one of the masked or hooded assassins. So the basic gist is all of the kind of royalty that you've gathered as part of your team are now the villains that you're fighting against, which by itself sounds like kind of a dumb concept, but the way they go about it I think is very interesting, but we'll go forward. The first thing that this chapter does that's interesting is a new gameplay gimmick in the assassins will have this ability to lower your maximum health if they attack you. I think they chip it down 5 HP at a time. So if they attack you, they have a chance to actually do damage to you. And then they can lower your maximum health if they're successful in their attack. So already there's a little bit of difficulty being added into it. It's not too bad. And I will say the best time to do this DLC is probably around Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 of the story, if not at the very end of the game, because you are using kind of preset versions of the characters that you have currently available on your save file. So they will be set at a certain level in class depending on which Xenologue you're doing. And Chapter 9, Chapter 10 is like right before you lose all your emblem rings outside of the DLC bracelets. So obviously I think you're really doing hard mode if you're doing the DLC after you lose all of your emblem rings, because honestly ones like Sigurd, I think Sigurd's the best emblem ring in the game. I would not have been able to do it as easily if I didn't have all those ones available. Now, obviously, if you're doing it that early, then you don't have access to a lot of the later units and the later emblem rings like Ike and so forth. But I think Chapter 9, Chapter 10, I did it Chapter 9, is a really good spot to do it because you have the most rings at that point until you're near the end of the game. And you have some pretty good units. Like I had pretty much all of the Firene and Brodian royalty and their retainers. And especially my MVP of the entire thing was Alfred with the Sigurd ring. So good, so good. Moving forward, you head to Firene, funnily enough, and you go against Alfred and Celine. And Alfred has this really raw quote of like, we're gonna go to Brodia and make sure we bring these guys' heads on a pike to show them how serious we are. Because the whole deal is, since Alfred is typically like the elder, he is like the kind of the one in charge, and Celine is kind of the younger. This time around, Celine wants blood. She desires blood. Going so far as to even like offering up to go to Brodia to die in combat to further her goals. And you continue through and you kind of beat some sense into them. They end up realizing that they can't beat you, so they kind of give you the emblem bracelet. But things are obviously still very tense. And one thing that is also shown very early on is that Nell is very abrasive with Alir. Nil is like all for like, the Divine Dragon coming back, even if it's not their Divine Dragon. And that kind of like tension between Nell and Alir will continue through. And you then travel to Brodia, where you meet Alchrist and Diamant. Diamant, who's very kind of timid. Not timid, more timid. I would not say he's fully timid, but he's definitely not as headstrong and kind of like boar-like, Dimitri-like. And Alchrist he's a menace. This guy he's straight up calling Diamant like a fool to his face. He's very much embodying the personality that he puts on in the main story before he kind of joins you up, and I like that because I was kind of sad that he never really displays that ever again. So he was very much a positive in seeing this. And you do the same thing. You beat them and you fight similar circumstances. There isn't any like crazy new gimmick that's added. You're just kind of having like a slightly harder Brodian chapter. And then you kind of knock some sense into them. Alchrist is still like looking to shed blood, but Diamant's even like, do you have a plan? Like, what is your plan if you're going to continue to fight? And Alcris is like, well, okay, fine, I guess. Then shit gets real, because after you kind of like neutralize tension, where Diamant kind of like removes himself from being a threat, because Brodia is very specifically not starting a war to like get the bracelets to invade other countries, but to instead form like a full impenetrable shield to like have the best defense, which is interesting because that kind of hasn't been tackled in the main game so far, because Brodia is, you know, very, very invasive concerning how its relationship with Elugia is. But so you think it's going to go exactly the same way as Firene, where like, okay, you pacify the two royals, and then you move on to Elugia next. Turns out that's not what's going to happen. Nell comes up to them like after everything has happened and like everybody's separated. She like goes to their royal quarters, and they're like, oh, well, how did the soldiers let you in? And Nell's just like, I killed them. And they're like, excuse me? And then she straight up murders the both of them very plainly. And I remember looking at my screen and going, what the fuck just happened? My theory was that like one of the two was going to have some shenanigans going on with them. And based on how abrasive Nell was, it was going to be a very simply foreshadowed, like, she was going to be the traitor. And then she just went straight up before everything happened, and she just straight up kills Brody. She kills Diamant and Alcris. And I'm like, okay, we're getting the villain reveal early, but we're going to have to wait forever to get this revealed to Alear, because that's just going to be the story this is. Very, like, Anthony Fire Emblem Fates. Which, you know, is what I expected, but I just wasn't expecting them to, like, straight up just resort to murder in this Fire Emblem game. Mainly with, like, the main characters of Brodia. And in that moment, I started to think, I'm like, wow, I'm not really seeing any of the retainers, like Amber for Diamant, Citrine and Lapis for Alcris. Like, I hadn't seen, like, Louis or Chloe for Celine, or Boucheron and Etier for Alfred. So, like, I'm like, there really weren't any mirror retainers, but I guess it makes sense because they do need to come in and like re-record new voices, so I guess it makes sense that you don't want to do that for every single character. So I guess just the royals is fine. And then Nell is like, man, that was just as easy as killing Celine and Alfred. And I remember being like, what? Okay, so we're just gonna... everybody's dying, apparently. And then you continue on to the next chapter, which is chapter 4, or Xenologue 4. And this is where the game starts getting hard, because you're doing a free-for-all, three-for-all battle where Elugia and Solm are fighting each other, and you're fighting both at once in a map that's kind of... the map itself isn't very similar to like the Gronder Field battle from Three Houses, but the setup is very similar. And this is a much harder fight, let me tell you. This fight, I had fucked up because I didn't realize that I could give emblem rings to the new characters, Nell and Nil. And then also, I didn't mention, the 4 hounds from the main game get reflected versions here, which are good, and they join you. They are the 4 winds, and they are Celestia, who is the counterpart to Zephia. Gregory is the counterpart to Gris. Madeline is the counterpart to Marnie. And Mavier is very coincidentally the counterpart to Mavier. So that naming kind of maybe predicts that maybe the reflected Mavier is the one who's going to be kind of the one behind it all, before I got deeper into the Nell idea, and before Nell revealed herself to be fucking murderous psychopath up to that point. So my theory was like maybe Mavier is the one that ends up being the bad guy, since in the main story he's the one that ends up like joining you in the end. So that was kind of in the back of my mind. Celestia is a really good unit. You get her first, and she is a wyvern rider who wields swords and magic, and Then you get Gregory, who is kind of a sorcerer. I can't remember his class title, but it's very good. And then Madeline is an armored axe general. She is really good too. We'll get to Maubir in a bit. But so I had to redo this chapter because I didn't put them with any emblem rings at first, and I didn't outfit their inventory because I totally could have. Anyway, it was hard. And then when you beat it, the revelation comes out that Nell is not like a psychopath, but she's been super abrasive to Alir because she loved the Alir that died. And this Alir being here is like a stark reminder of what she lost. And I have to say, the fact that they specifically made the other Alir the opposite gender directly confirms Nell as bisexual, which is cool when it's like official and it's come forward, because that's not all that common. I mean, with 3 houses and 3 hopes, it's been more common, but it's always nice to get like a canon bisexual character, and Nell is, because she was so abrasive to Alir because she was starting to feel those similar feelings, because even though their outward appearance is different, their spirit is the same, their friendliness is the same, their love for their friends is the same. And so, like, 100%, if war was not happening, Nell would fall for Alir regardless of their gender. Cool. That's also a really cool character moment because it makes sense for why she's so abrasive, and she's not just, I'm the villain of the DLC. Also, she murdered the royals because everybody's been dead the whole game. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead. This reveal broke my mind. So, literally, everybody in this universe outside of Nell, and the 4 winds are dead. And they are being puppeteered as the corrupted, which is a concept from the main game, which was already used in really cool and unique ways, and they're using it here in cool and unique ways. I fucking love it. Everybody's dead, and she has a very good reason for not telling the party about this, or mainly, well, yeah, the party, because Nell's the only one who knows. Because she says, I did not want to put the fact that everyone that you know from your world is dead over here. I didn't want to have you be the one that kills them, because I care about you. I care about your feelings. This is something that I had to do myself. And it's not the fact that, like, Nil knew and that he had no reason to tell. Like, she was the only one that knew, and she was the only one that... It's such good character writing, and it's such a good twist, and it's such a good play on expectations, which is what this DLC is. It's such a fantastic play on expectations, and it delivers such good writing that only continues because you continue forward, and it comes to be known that Nil is the true villain of the DLC. And this comes out because he was a fell dragon who lost his twin that wasn't Nell. And he was given kind of like a mission by Sombron to be like an inner agent. This is going to get delved into more in a second. So Nil, like the real Nil, is dead. And this character who has been Nil is like an imposter. Sus. I know. Haha. And my brain is like, okay, well, he's the, like, I'm evil because I'm bad guy. Okay, that's fine. And you start chapter 5, which is nuts as a chapter because, one, Alir is captured and has all their inventory stripped, and they are put in this, like, barrier that is constantly being attacked. Constantly. So you have to have a healer on them, like, pretty much at all times. And then Nell is also, like, separated from the rest of your party, who is being constantly onslaughted by Nil. or the character who is pretending to be Nil. So you have like 2 characters at once. You're managing health to make sure that they don't die. And then you have this long, like, not maze, but like this temple you're going through, making sure that all your other characters are alive. Which, one thing I will say is, they did a very good thing here in the only characters that matter if they die in this whole DLC is Nil, when you have him available, Nell, and Alir. If anybody else dies, they will come back. It's basically like casual mode. They will come back next chapter. You don't have to worry about it, which I think works well. Because, oh boy, these get tough. I did try to minimize my amounts of losses, and I only ended up losing 1 character in Chapter 5 and 1 character in Chapter 6, or the endgame. So I feel like I did pretty well. So Chapter 5 was very tough, because there are just so many enemies, and Alir is out of commission the entire fight, and you have to dedicate at least 2 healers if you don't specify them, or if you don't get lucky. I used Chloe with her physic to keep Alir and Nell alive. The one thing that Nell has going for them is that they have 3 elixirs in their inventory, so they have like 3 sets of 3 heals that they can kind of coast off of while you focus on healing Alir. And Alir, thankfully, only really has to dodge sub 50% accuracy hits each time. There's nothing that's like super accurate. However, I got super unlucky so many times. Alir got hit by so many 51% chance hits. It's nuts. You finally get through this chapter, and you make it through the end. This was a long chapter too, and the music is really good. I thought this was going to be the end game because Nil has 2 full health bars and like 60 HP, and he has like 40 something resistance and like 25 defense. You have to really like surround him with everybody near the end because Nil is not doing anything to him. But I was able to chip down one of his health bars with just Nell, which is pretty cool because I gave her Camilla. So her like engage ability was able to do some damage. You beat the chapter, and then the 4 winds who had been like they stuck behind to stand off against the corrupted, they decide that they're going to sacrifice themselves to crush the temple, like break the 4 corners of the temple to have it collapse on them, to destroy all the corrupted. And they do this knowing that they're going to die, so you think like, oh, it's the sacrifice. So they're gone because they are not in the chapter whatsoever, which is also hard because you've been like giving these guys your emblem rings. But at the end, it's revealed that Celestia, Madeline, and Gregory make it out alive, and you're like, how the fuck did you get here, guys? I hope it's not something dumb. And then it's revealed that Mavier sacrificed himself, and that's why he's not going to be coming back, because, spoiler alert, after you beat the DLC, you get Celestia, Madeline, Gregory, Nell, and Nil in your party. We'll get to that in a second in the main game. But obviously, they're not going to bring a second Mavier over because he's named the same character. He's the same guy. He's the same guy. And of course, my theory was he's the bad guy. No! Turns out it's because he dies using the warp staff to get the others out to safety. I don't think I've laughed as hard as I've ever laughed at realizing that the warp staff meme was made canon into a super serious moment near the end of the DLC. If you don't know the warp staff meme, let me play.
You know, I could slog through this map.
Or I could just use the warp staff.
Could actually play the game.
Or I could use the warp staff. Or I could use the warp staff.
Bismix is a fantastic Fire Emblem YouTuber. You need to check him out. The warp staff meme is probably my favorite Fire Emblem meme. Outside of, is it the Dawn Brigade? Like, just little things that stick in my brain. Or Zelgius's interesting maneuver. Anyway, it's the one thing that's not from Radiant Dawn that's my favorite meme. And it's using a series staple item in a unique way to give a very justified sacrifice. It's so good. It plays on expectations. It's so good. And I'm perfectly fine with how this ends up. Because obviously you could just go as like, oh, of course they live. Cheapen the dramatic emotional moment. But if you give me a very solid character reason or a very solid series of logic reason, I'm all for it. Anyway, the next thing that happens is you take the final fight to Somniel, which is a fantastic final battle place. I've been skipping over some minor plot things. Like there are interludes of story between each chapter that are really good. I'm not going to go over them here because I think you should play it for yourself, but it is more kind of backstory for Nil and Nil. And what basically happens is Alir, to save Nil's life, awakens the final bracelet, which is the three houses leaders, and thus allows Nil to take the form of a fell dragon fully and become the final boss. And it is a very unique battle in the sense that it's similar to Engage's main endgame, but it's different in that it forces you to go through the entire map, whereas Engage's main endgame, you only have to really kill a few of the Dark Lords, or whatever that... So I like the idea of Engage's endgame, but I feel like they could have done a little bit more with it, where they summon kind of like dark emblem rings of the villains, and it's like implied who they are, but they don't go like the whole way, and you don't have to kill all of them. Here, there are three kind of like dark dragon sigils that Nil will transport between over the course of the battle as you travel to the top of the map, because he is right there with you at the beginning, but he is invincible until you get to the end. And you're going through like a gauntlet of these battles, of which the animations are fantastic, by the way. And if you're too slow, he will have this insta-kill move before he moves to the next sigil that just instantly kills every enemy in his range, or every unit in his range, enemy and player character included. So you want to try to kill all the enemies that are in his range as you can, because the more that he kills, the stronger he gets, and it stacks. So you're just going through the whole thing, and you're fighting all of the corrupted versions of all of the royals who have the emblem bracelets, and you're putting them to rest finally. And the music, the new final boss theme they have here is so good. I think I actually prefer it to the main game's final boss theme, which was, I liked it symbolically, but melodically was probably lesser on my Fire Emblem final boss theme rankings. This one was really good. It reminded me very much of like a Fates composition, which I know I hate most of Fates, but Fates' music is peak. There's also a small little like 2 or 3 bar part of it that's very Three Houses-esque. So a really, really good final boss theme, and a really stressful final boss like arena that forces you to like really interact with all of its elements, and is very difficult. And then you get to the end and you finally clear, and you're pretty much at a standstill. You've transformed Nil back to himself, and he kind of fully reveals he is not Nil. He took his place, and he realizes he's defeated. He accepts death. He wants his suffering to be over. And Nell says that she knew. She knew Nil died, and she knew that he was lying to her. But she also knew that he had known Nil, and that he pretended to be her brother, not at Sombron's request, which is true, but at Nil's request to take care of his sister. And it was only after that Sombron kind of corrupted the ideals. And she says that she didn't basically call him out on it, because she knew that was a good deed to like honor Nil's last wish, and she mourned Nil silently. And so like she allowed him to get this relationship that he never had, while she also got this relationship for him as like a second brother that she didn't have. And so she says, I can't stand losing a second brother, so she ends up stabbing herself and saying, essentially, I'm not gonna kill you. I can't bear to have that pain again after everything that I've lost. Do what you will with your life now. And one thing that I was very worried about at this moment, because as Nell stabs herself, the Dragonstone that Nil had used to turn into the Fell Dragon shatters, because that was an established lore piece that when a dragon dies, their Dragonstone shatters. And that's what happens with Lumeria in the beginning of Engage. One of the characters, I think it's Alir, says like, well, you were probably affected by Sombron's influence and that's why you did this. And Nil, who reveals that his true name is Rafal, and that's the name he's going to go by from this point on. Rafal reveals, like, he's like, no. This wasn't a case of me being like brainwashed and now I'm good. Like, this was my responsibility to bear. I can't let anybody else take that responsibility. I did this. I chose to do this. I don't regret the choices I made. I just wish that I could have been a better brother to her. I wish that she could have not have had to die. And this is such a good heel turn play on expectations, because it's very easy when you're writing of characters who you want to be a playable character after to go, well, he was just brainwashed, so I guess he's fine. We just forgive you. Rafal specifically says, no, I don't want you to forgive me. I don't forgive me. I did this. Sombron affected my decision, but I'm the one who made the decision. And then he goes on and says, I'm going to use my dragon energy to revive Nell, understanding that it's going to take 1,000 years for that to happen, and I'm going to sit here and watch over her and make sure that happens. And when that happens, and if she's able to forgive me, I will come join you on the other side. Because it's such a good use of the parallel of what Lumeria did for Alir. And I think that is a good atonement for Rafal's character, because if he was just like, oh, Sombron brainwashed me and that's it, now I'm good, I'm gonna come join you guys, Nell's dead, oops, I'll fight in her memory, he, then it would have literally spat in her face. It would have spat in her memory, and it would not have been earned. But that is a very reasonable way to turn a character like this into to do something with that. You have a character who is going to understand they are fully responsible for their actions and what happened. This world is literally fucked, and it's his fault. And what he can do to atone for that is give life back to the sister who cared for him, regardless of who he actually was. Spend 1,000 years making sure that happens, and then, even then, asking for her forgiveness, not expecting it. That's literally perfect. And then from that point on, Alir does return back to their world and asks the remaining 3 winds to come back with her, because literally everybody else is dead in their world. Which is still fucked up, but I love it because it's actual consequences. I'm glad that their entire world didn't just get revived, because it would have cheapened the actual deaths. And then Nell and Rafal come, because time is different between dimensions. They did spend 1,000 years, and they become playable characters in the main story. I'm going to use them because I'm interested in using them in a not constrained, predetermined role. But It was just really good. It was really good. It played on expectations in the same way that the main game did, and it was very close to doing something very dumb, but it very expertly, specifically chose to avoid doing that and did something that I've really not seen done in an instance like this in a game. Usually, characters that are reformed are at the very best case scenario, just like, okay, like, that's not bad. So something that is, like, actively good in that sense. I just have to applaud. The writing really surprised me. The gameplay is really hard. I can't even imagine these chapters on harder difficulties. I can't even imagine. And yeah, and you also get 2 new classes to work with. A Cannoneer, which is a magical ballista, and Enchanter, or Enchantress, which, like, converts items into buffs, which is kind of nuts. I'm gonna, like, look into that deeper, but yeah, that's the Fire Emblem Engage DLC, not to mention the, like, waves of new characters and maps that are also awesome. Soren is really good. Camilla, I hate Camilla, but she's really good. Veronica is a really good emblem. I love her ability. It's so fun. Hector is probably my least favorite of the bunch. Like, I like Hector, but him as a unit is probably my least favorite. Crom and Robin's really good. Tiki is phenomenal. And the Edelgard trio is pretty good. They're probably, like, my second to least favorite as a gameplay unit. All of them fantastic. I love the fan service. I love the references. This DLC was fantastic. I was not expecting it to be as good. It came out way sooner than I expected. They're also playing on expectations with the release date because the game was finished for so long. Wow. Oh, wow. That's about it. That's pretty much all I have to say. And I really recommend it. I recommend Engage. I recommend the DLC. Yeah, go play it. This is probably outside of Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, like, out of being, like, the core experience, this is probably, like, my second favorite Fire Emblem game experience, just as a whole. But with that, if you like this video, if you like the Fire Emblem, share your thoughts below. If you've played the DLC, if you played just the main game, share your thoughts, and, you know, give me a like and subscribe. Check you guys next time for probably Xenoblade Chronicles X Explained. Check you guys then.